You are now entering a place where the lines between the real and the terrifying blur. Welcome back to the Scary Collector. I am glad you came, and I am even more glad that you are somewhere safe right now, because what I am about to share with you tonight is not fiction. These are not campfire tales invented to scare children. These are not urban legends passed down through generations, distorted by years of retelling. These are real accounts, documented, verified as best as the survivors, investigators, and witnesses could manage. These are the stories that people lived through, and in some cases, barely survived. Tonight, we have 7 of them. 7 stories that will burrow into your mind and refuse to leave. Stories that will make you look twice at the shadows in the corner of your room. Stories that will make you hesitate before you open a door, answer a knock, or walk alone at night. So get comfortable. Turn off most of your lights. Leave just enough to feel safe. And stay with me, because once you hear what happened to these people, you will never quite see the world the same way again. These are 7 disturbing, true horror stories. Let us begin. Story 1. The Man in the Attic. There is something deeply primal about the fear of being watched. Not the general anxiety of public life. Not the awareness of cameras on street corners or the sensation of eyes on you in a crowded room. I am talking about something far more ancient, far more specific. The bone-deep dread that comes when you realize that someone has been watching you, studying you, learning your routines in the place where you believed you were most private. In your home. This is what happened to a woman I will call Miriam. Miriam was 31 years old when she moved into a rented house in a mid-sized city in the American Midwest. The house was older, built sometime in the 1940s, and it had that particular character that old homes carry: the creaking floorboards, the windows that stuck slightly, the radiators that knocked and hissed on cold nights. She liked it. She was newly single after the end of a long relationship, and the house felt like exactly the kind of place where a person could start over. Quiet street, good neighbors, a small backyard with an oak tree that must have been 50 years old at least. She moved in during the first week of October. The landlord, a man in his 60s who lived several towns away, had been friendly but brief during the showing. He gave her 2 keys, explained where to find the fuse box in the basement, and told her the attic was accessible through a hatch in the ceiling of the upstairs hallway, but that it was just for storage and she should not worry about it. She did not worry about it. Not at first. The first 3 weeks in the house were perfectly ordinary. She unpacked her things, arranged her furniture, found a coffee shop 2 blocks away that she liked, and began to settle into a rhythm. She worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, so her days were quiet, spent at her desk in the front room with her laptop and her headphones and her coffee. The noises started in the 4th week. At first she assumed it was the house settling. She had grown up in an old house and she knew the sounds they made, the ticks and groans and subtle complaints of an aging structure responding to temperature changes. But these sounds were different in a way she could not immediately articulate. They were rhythmic in a way that settling was not, and they seemed to follow her. When she was in the kitchen, the sounds came from above the kitchen. When she moved to the living room, they moved too. Not obviously, not dramatically, just slightly, just enough that, over days of paying close attention, she began to notice the pattern. She told herself she was being paranoid. She told herself that the acoustics of old houses were strange, that sounds traveled through walls and floors in unpredictable ways. She turned her music up a little louder. She told herself she was fine. Then came the night she could not sleep. It was a Wednesday in the 3rd week of November, and the temperature had dropped sharply. Miriam lay awake in her bed past 2 in the morning, listening to the wind press against the windows. And then she heard something that was unmistakably not the wind. It was a footstep. One single, deliberate footstep, directly above her bedroom ceiling. She lay completely still, her heart hammering. She told herself it was an animal. A raccoon, maybe. They got into attics sometimes. She had heard this. She closed her eyes and breathed through her nose and waited. Silence. And then another footstep. And another. She got up. This is what is remarkable about Miriam, and what she herself has described as both the bravest and most foolish thing she has ever done. She got up, went to the hallway, pulled the cord that folded down the attic stairs and climbed them. The attic was dark. She had brought her phone for the flashlight, and she swept it around the space. It was empty, mostly. There was the landlord's old junk, the boxes and rolled-up carpets and old furniture that landlords always seem to store in attics. There was dust on the floor, a lot of dust, and in the dust there were footprints. Not animal prints, human footprints. The clear, unmistakable impressions of bare human feet. Large ones. And they moved in a path that, when Miriam traced it with her light, described a circuit of the attic that tracked almost exactly the layout of the rooms below. The prints were fresh enough that the dust had not settled back into them. She screamed. She did not mean to, but she did. She scrambled back down the attic stairs and ran to her bedroom and locked the door and called the police. The police came. They searched the attic thoroughly and found no one there. But they did find what Miriam had found, the footprints, and they found something else she had missed in her panic. In the far corner of the attic, partially hidden behind a stack of old boxes, there was a space that had been cleared. Not just of dust, but intentionally arranged. There was a thin sleeping pad, military issue and rolled up but clearly used. There were several empty water bottles. There was a small bag containing a change of clothes, a flashlight, a box of crackers, and a notebook. The notebook was the worst part. The police did not show it to Miriam for several days, and when they finally did, they showed her only a few pages, and even those they warned her about first. What the notebook contained were observations. Detailed, methodical, dated observations of Miriam's daily life. What time she woke up, what she ate for breakfast, what she wore, what she worked on, who she called, what she watched on television, whether she seemed happy or sad or distracted. Observations about her habits, her schedule, her physical appearance. Written in a small, careful hand that showed no emotion whatsoever, as though the author were a scientist recording data about a lab subject. The entries went back 11 days before Miriam had moved in. Whoever had been living in that attic had been there before she arrived, had watched her move in, had watched her entire first month in what she thought was her home. The man was never found. The landlord claimed total ignorance and was never charged with anything, though investigators found the situation deeply suspicious. The attic hatch had a lock on it from the inside, a detail neither Miriam nor the landlord had ever mentioned to each other because neither had known it was there. Miriam moved out that night, staying first with a friend, then eventually leaving the city altogether. She has spoken about this experience in several interviews and in her own writing, and she has described one detail that she says haunts her most. On the very last page of the notebook that the police showed her, the very last entry, written on the night before she found the footprints and called the police, were 4 words. She know. WSIM here. Story 2. The wrong house. Most horror arrives quietly. It does not announce itself. It does not announce itself with thunder or dramatic music or any of the signals we have been trained by movies to recognize. It arrives wearing ordinary clothes. It knocks on the front door. This is the story of a family I will call the Hargroves. They lived in a suburban neighborhood in the southeastern United States, a pleasant, tree-lined street of houses built in the 1980s, all with 2-car garages and small front lawns and the kind of comfortable sameness that feels like safety. The Hargroves were a family of 4. David and Sarah, married for 12 years, and their 2 children, a son of 9 named Marcus and a daughter of 6 named Lily. They were, by all accounts that matter for this story, completely normal. Not exceptional. Not troubled. Not the kind of family that attracts strange attention. The nightmare started on an ordinary Tuesday evening in April. David was traveling for work. He did this regularly, a few trips per month, nothing unusual. Sarah was home with the kids, doing the evening routine. Dinner, baths, homework for Marcus, a bedtime story for Lily. The kind of evening that feels like a warm, predictable island in the chaos of life. It was just past 8 o'clock when someone knocked on the front door. Sarah looked through the peephole. There was a man standing on the porch. He was perhaps 40, wearing jeans and a gray jacket, and he was looking not at the door but slightly to the side, as though distracted by something in the yard. He looked normal. He looked like someone's neighbor. She opened the door, leaving the chain on. The man turned to look at her and smiled. He had a very pleasant smile, she would later describe it. The kind of smile that made you feel immediately at ease, which, when she thought about it afterward, was perhaps the most frightening thing about him. He said he was sorry to bother her. He said he was looking for his dog, a beagle, who had gotten out of his yard earlier that day. He had a photo on his phone. He held it up through the gap in the door. It was a beagle. Sarah looked at it and felt that warm sympathy that lost pets inspire in most people, and she told him she was sorry, she had not seen a dog. He thanked her, still smiling, and said he might come back tomorrow to check if she had seen it. She said of course. He walked back down the porch steps. Sarah closed the door and did not think about it again that night. He came back the next evening. Same time. Same knock. Same man, same smile, same story. Had she seen the dog? She had not. He apologized again. He said the dog had been in the family for 8 years and his kids were devastated. Sarah said she was sorry, she would keep an eye out. He thanked her. He left. She mentioned it to David when he called that night. He said the guy sounded harmless, probably just a worried pet owner. She agreed. He came back the 3rd evening. This time something felt different. She could not say exactly what. He was the same clothes, the same smile, the same story. But when she looked through the peephole before opening the door, she noticed that he was not looking to the side this time. He was looking directly at the peephole. And he was smiling before she had said anything. Before she had indicated in any way that she was there. She did not open the door. She stood very still and watched him through the peephole. He stood on the porch for approximately 3 minutes without moving, still smiling faintly, looking at the door. Then he turned and walked away. Sarah called David. David said to call the police if she felt unsafe. She felt like she was overreacting. She did not call. The 4th evening he did not knock. He walked around the house. Sarah saw this from the upstairs window. She had been putting Lily to bed and happened to look out at the backyard. And she saw him, walking slowly along the back fence, looking at the house, taking his time, not attempting to hide, just looking. She called the police immediately. By the time they arrived, the man was gone. The officers were polite and professional and deeply limited by what they could actually do. No law had been broken. Looking at a house is not a crime. They took a description, told her to call immediately if he returned or if she felt threatened, and left. He came back that night. It was past midnight when Sarah heard the sound. She was still awake, unable to sleep, lying in her bed with her phone in her hand. The sound was at the back door, not the front. It was a soft, scraping sound, like a key being tried in a lock. She called 911 immediately and whispered the situation. The operator told her to stay on the line. Police were on the way. The scraping stopped. Then she heard a different sound. Closer. From inside the house. She would later describe what happened next as the longest 4 minutes of her life. She locked her bedroom door, got her children from their rooms and brought them into hers, and pushed the heavy dresser in front of the door, all while whispering to a 911 operator and telling her children in a low, steady voice that everything was fine. They were just going to have a little adventure in Mom's room tonight. The police arrived in 4 minutes. They entered the house to find a window in the laundry room had been forced open. They searched every room. They found no one. But in the kitchen, on the counter next to the refrigerator, there was a key. A single house key. It had been placed there, not dropped, placed neatly and deliberately on the kitchen counter. It was a copy of the Hargroves' front door key. The investigation that followed determined that the key had been made from an impression of the original, a technique that requires only a few seconds of access to a key, achievable, for example, by pressing it into soft material. The original key had last been out of Sarah's possession approximately 6 months earlier, when a contractor had done some work on the house and she had briefly left her keys on the kitchen counter. The contractor was located and questioned. He had a solid alibi and no connection to the man Sarah had described. The man at the door was never identified. He was never found. The Hargroves moved within 2 weeks to a house in a different part of the state, a house that David spent considerable money and time fitting with new locks, security cameras, and a reinforced door frame. Sarah has said in the years since that what disturbs her most is not the key, though the key disturbs her profoundly. It is the question of how long the planning had been going on. 3 evenings of knocking at the door was clearly reconnaissance, establishing a routine, testing her responses, learning her schedule. But the key was older than that. The key required access to the original 6 months before the knocking began. Someone had been planning to enter their home for at least 6 months. And they ever knew. And he was never caught. Story 3. The Watcher on the Road. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes with driving alone at night. The road narrows to a tunnel of light. The world outside your windshield becomes a wall of darkness. And everything that moves out there, every shape at the edge of your headlights, every flicker in the trees, every distant pair of eyes reflecting back at you, takes on a significance it would never have in daylight. This story was told to me through written testimony by a man I will call Raymond. Raymond was a long-haul trucker for 22 years. He has driven hundreds of thousands of miles on highways across North America, and he is not, by his own description, a man who frightens easily. He grew up in rural Texas, spent 4 years in the military, and spent more than 2 decades on roads that most people never travel at the hours he traveled them. He has seen accidents. He has seen violence. He has seen the kinds of things that happen on highways at 3 in the morning. He says what happened on Route 17 in eastern Oregon in the fall of a recent October is the only thing he has ever experienced that he cannot explain. And it is the only thing that made him consider quitting his job. He was driving a refrigerated cargo truck. The load was produce, bound for a distribution center 6 hours away. It was just past 2 in the morning and the road was empty in a way that roads in eastern Oregon can be genuinely, completely empty. Not just quiet, empty. No other headlights. No towns within 30 miles. Just the highway and the high desert on either side and the enormous sky above. He first saw the figure at mile marker 44. It was standing at the side of the road. Not on the shoulder, but just off it, in the scrub brush at the road's edge. Standing completely still. Raymond caught it in his headlights for perhaps 2 seconds before he was past it. It appeared to be a person. Tall, standing very straight, arms at its sides. He registered it in that 2-second window and then it was behind him. He did not stop. Stopping on a deserted highway at 2 in the morning for a figure at the roadside is the kind of thing that experienced truckers have learned, through training and through instinct, not to do. He kept driving. He noted the mile marker. He called it in on his CB radio, alerting any highway patrol that might be in the area. He drove another 8 miles. At mile marker 52, there was another figure. Same position. Side of the road. Just off the shoulder. Standing completely still. Arms at its sides. Raymond slowed just slightly, just enough to get a better look. The figure appeared to be wearing dark clothing. It appeared to be looking at the road, not at his truck. It did not move as he passed. He sped up. He got back on the CB radio. He reported 2 figures on the highway, 8 miles apart, both standing at the roadside in the middle of the night on a deserted road. The dispatcher said she would pass it along. She sounded bored, the way dispatchers do when they are overworked and understaffed and have heard too many strange reports from too many night drivers. Raymond kept driving. Mile marker 61. Another figure. This one was different. Not in appearance, same dark clothing, same still posture. But it was not at the side of the road. It was standing in the center of the lane. Raymond hit his brakes hard. His truck shuddered and groaned, and he came to a stop perhaps 30 feet from the figure. His headlights illuminated it fully. It was a person. He was now sure of that. Tall, lean, wearing dark clothing that he could now see was a long coat of some kind. The face was in shadow because the head was bowed, looking down at the road. Raymond sat in his truck with his foot on the brake and his hands on the wheel and his heart hammering. He hit his horn. A long, heavy blast that, on a refrigerated truck, is loud enough to wake people in houses a quarter-mile away. The figure did not move. He hit it again. And again. Nothing. He picked up his phone to call 911. He looked down at it for perhaps 3 seconds to unlock the screen and dial. When he looked back up, the figure was gone. The road ahead was empty. He sat there for a full minute, shaking, looking at the empty highway. Then, slowly, he drove forward. He passed the spot where the figure had been standing, and he looked out the passenger window and then the driver's window, but there was nothing there. No one at the roadside. No one in the brush. Nothing. He called 911. He reported what he had seen. He drove slowly to the next town, where he pulled into a gas station that was, by some mercy, still open at that hour. He told the attendant what had happened. The attendant, a young man of perhaps 20, went pale and told him something. He was the 4th driver in 3 weeks to report figures on that stretch of Route 17. The highway patrol had investigated twice. They had found no one, nothing, no evidence of any kind. Raymond sat in that gas station parking lot until the sun came up. He completed his delivery, but he called his dispatcher and requested a different route assignment. He has never driven Route 17 again. What makes this story stranger is what Raymond found later that day, when he stopped to rest at a truck stop with internet access and searched for information about that area of highway. The stretch between mile markers 40 and 70 on Route 17 passes through land that was, for a period in the mid-20th century, used as a testing ground. Not for weapons, or at least not weapons in the conventional sense. Raymond is vague on the details, and the information he found was fragmentary and contradictory. But locals apparently refer to that stretch of highway by a name. They call it the Gallery. Now, Odie seems to know exactly why. Story 4. The Message. We live in a world of constant communication. This is something we accept without much thought, the perpetual availability, the expectation that if someone needs to reach you they can, instantly at any hour, and that if you receive a message it came from who it appears to have come from. We place enormous trust in this system, perhaps more trust than is wise. This is the story of a woman I will call Celeste. Celeste was 28 and lived alone in a city apartment. She worked in finance, long hours, high stress, the kind of job that leaves you exhausted by 9 o'clock most evenings. She had a small social circle, maintained with the careful effort of someone who does not have much free time. She had recently ended a 2-year relationship, a fact that is relevant to what happened. On a Thursday night in February, Celeste was at home, already in bed, half asleep, when her phone buzzed with a text message. The message was from her ex-boyfriend, whose name I will give as Tyler. This alone was strange. They had not spoken since the breakup, 3 months earlier. It had not been a hostile parting, but it had been a clear one. Tyler had seemed to accept the end of the relationship without contest, and there had been no contact since. The message said, "Can we talk? I'm right outside. Please answer the door." Celeste sat up in bed. She stared at the message. Her first feeling was confusion. Her second feeling, arriving a few seconds behind, was a cold unease that she could not immediately explain. She typed back, "What? Why are you outside? It's almost midnight." He responded almost immediately, "I know. I'm sorry. I just need to talk to you. It's important. Please." She sat there in the dark of her apartment for a long moment. Then she did something smart, something she later credited to a feeling she could not name but did not ignore. She did not go to the door. Instead, she called Tyler. His phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She hung up and called again. This time he answered on the second ring, his voice groggy, clearly just woken from sleep. He was at home. He had been asleep since 10. He had not sent her any messages. He had not been anywhere near her apartment. Celeste looked at her phone. The messages were there, in the thread with Tyler's name and Tyler's number, both sent from his contact. Tyler was still on the phone with her. She read him the messages. She heard him go very still on the other end of the line. He said he was calling the police. She said she already was. While she was on the phone with 911, still sitting in her bed in the dark, someone knocked on her door. Not a loud knock. A soft, polite knock. The kind of knock that says, "I am not threatening. I am just here. Please let me in." She did not move. She whispered to the 911 operator that someone was at her door. The operator told her to stay away from the door and that officers were on the way. She heard a voice through the door. It said Tyler's name. It said it in a question as though checking. Tyler? Like someone making sure they had the right apartment. Tyler's voice, she would later tell police, her hands shaking as she described it. The same cadence, the same accent. Whoever was outside her door had spent enough time listening to Tyler's voice to imitate it. Police arrived within 6 minutes. No one was in the hallway or the stairwell or the lobby. The building had security cameras, but the angle covered only the elevator and not the stairwell, and the image captured a figure, seen only from behind and in partial shadow, that could have been anyone. The investigation into how Tyler's number had been used to send those messages determined that someone had used a caller ID spoofing service, the same technology used in certain types of phone fraud, to make messages appear to come from his number. Setting this up requires knowing the target's number, the contact's number, and having access to a spoofing platform. It is not technically complex. What was never determined was how the person outside knew her address. Celeste had moved to her current apartment 4 months earlier, shortly before the breakup, and had not widely shared her new address. Her name was not on the building's public directory. She had no social media that listed her location. Tyler had her address. Her employer had it, and apparently so did someone else. Celeste moved in with her sister for a month. She bought a new phone with a new number. She changed the locks on the apartment and had a secondary deadbolt installed. She was never contacted by the same number or in the same way again. She was never able to determine who had been at her door. She has said, in the years since, that what she thinks about most is the planning involved. The voice imitation, the spoofed number, the knock designed to sound harmless. Everything arranged to get her to open that door. She is very grateful she called instead of answering. She says she does not know what would have happened if she had answered. She does not want to know. Neither do I. Story 5. The campsite. There is a reason human beings spent most of their history clustered together in settlements, in villages and towns and cities, in groups. It was not entirely about economics or agriculture. It was, at a very fundamental level, about safety. Safety in numbers. Safety in light. Safety in walls. The wilderness does not feel this way. The wilderness, for all its beauty, is a place where the rules humans have built for themselves do not entirely apply. And this story, perhaps more than any other I will share with you tonight, is a reminder of that. This account comes from a man I will call Patrick, who was 24 years old at the time of these events. He was on a solo camping trip in a national forest in the Pacific Northwest, a region of extraordinary natural beauty and, as it happens, extraordinary remoteness. He had been camping and hiking alone for several years by this point and considered himself experienced and comfortable in the backcountry. He had hiked approximately 9 miles from the trailhead, reaching a campsite near a small alpine lake. He made camp around 4 in the afternoon, as the experienced do, leaving plenty of light for setup and a meal before darkness. The site was designated, meaning it had a fire ring and a bear box, amenities that Patrick appreciated. He had not seen another hiker all day. He had dinner, watched the sun set over the lake, and went into his tent around 9. The night was cold and clear and he was tired from the hike. He was asleep quickly. He woke up at what he estimated was around midnight. He did not know what woke him. There was no sound he could immediately identify, no specific stimulus. He simply opened his eyes in the dark of his tent and was, immediately and completely, awake. He lay still and listened. It was quiet, the usual sounds of the forest at night, wind in the trees, the occasional distant sound of something moving in the brush. Nothing unusual. Then he heard it. A footstep. One footstep on the far side of his camp. The soft compression of pine needles under weight. And then, after a pause, another. Someone was walking around his camp. Patrick lay very still. He had a strategy for this kind of situation, one he had thought through in the way that careful solo campers do, a kind of mental preparation for the unexpected. He did not move. He listened. The footsteps moved slowly, deliberately. They circled the tent once, at a distance of perhaps 20 feet, moving without hurry. Then they stopped. Silence. Patrick's hand found his headlamp and his knife, both of which he kept beside him when sleeping alone in the backcountry. He waited. Then a sound he was not prepared for. A voice. Not words. Not language. Just a sound that was clearly human and clearly vocal, a low, sustained tone that rose and fell without rhythm, without melody, without any quality that Patrick could name. He described it later as the sound a person makes when they are unaware they are making any sound at all. Unconscious vocalization. The sound of someone not quite present in their own mind. It went on for perhaps 30 seconds. Then silence again. Then footsteps again, moving away, heading into the trees, away from the camp, toward the lake. Patrick waited 20 minutes without moving. Then he turned on his headlamp, unzipped his tent, and stepped out into the night, knife in hand. He was alone. He swept the light around the camp. He walked to the tree line where the footsteps had gone. He found nothing. No person. No tracks he could clearly identify in the darkness. No sign. He went back to his tent and did not sleep again that night. In the morning, in the daylight, he found the tracks. They were clear in the soft soil around the fire ring. Bare human feet. Large. They circled the camp exactly as he had heard them doing, a slow, deliberate circuit. And then they stopped. He tracked them as far as he could. They went toward the lake, to the water's edge, and there he found something he has described as the detail that stays with him above all else. At the very edge of the water, where the tracks ended, there was a small arrangement of stones. 9 of them, placed in a tight circle, inside of which someone had carefully arranged pine needles in a pattern he could not interpret. It looked, he said, like it had been made for him, like it was meant to be found, like a message in a language he did not speak. He packed his camp and hiked out that morning all 9 miles without stopping. The Forest Service was notified. Rangers investigated the area and confirmed the tracks and the stone arrangement. They found no individual camping or living in the area, though they noted that the forest is large enough and remote enough that a person could survive there for months without being encountered. Patrick has returned to solo camping since then. He says he refused to let the fear take that from him. But he has never returned to that forest. He says he thinks about the sound most of all. The voice, that low, wandering tone in the darkness. He says it sounded like someone singing to themselves, or someone counting. Story 6. The Nurse's Night. Some people see things in the night that they cannot explain. Some of those people are in positions where we expect them to be reliable witnesses, trained observers, people who have spent years in environments where accurate perception is not a preference but a professional requirement. This story comes from a woman I will call Dara. Dara is a registered nurse who has worked in a large hospital's intensive care unit for 11 years. She is, by the accounts of her colleagues, an exceptionally competent and measured professional. She is not given to dramatics. She is not a person who frightens easily. She is also a person who keeps a very detailed journal. This account is drawn from those journal entries, which she shared with me directly. The events she describes took place over the course of a single night shift, a 12-hour overnight from 7 in the evening to 7 the next morning, on a Tuesday in late winter. The ICU where Dara works has 12 beds, arranged in 2 rows of 6 in a large open bay. There is a nursing station at one end from which most of the beds are visible. The unit is never fully quiet. There are always machines, the steady punctuation of monitors and ventilators, the hiss and click of equipment. Nurses develop, over time, a highly calibrated ear for these sounds, knowing immediately when something is different, when an alarm is genuine versus routine. The shift started normally. 7 patients in the unit that night, all stable or improving. One of them, a man in his late 60s whom Dara refers to in her journal only as Mr. H, was scheduled to be moved to a regular room in the morning, recovered enough from the pneumonia that had brought him in 5 days earlier. He was sleeping comfortably when Dara checked on him at the start of her shift. At approximately 2:30 in the morning, Dara was at the nursing station completing paperwork when she noticed that Mr. H's blood pressure monitor was showing an unusual reading. Not alarming, just slightly outside normal parameters. She went to check on him. He was awake, sitting up slightly in his bed, looking toward the foot of it with an expression she describes as concentrated attention, as though watching something carefully. She asked him how he was feeling. He said he was fine. He said he was just watching. She asked what he was watching. He smiled, a little embarrassed, and said he was watching the woman who kept coming to stand at the foot of his bed. He said she had been coming every night since he had been admitted, standing there for a while and then leaving. He said he did not mind it. He found it comforting, actually. He thought at first she was a nurse or aide, but she never spoke and never touched anything, and she was always gone before anyone else came into the room. Dara asked him to describe the woman. He described an older woman, perhaps 70, wearing clothing that struck him as slightly old-fashioned. A dark dress, her hair pinned up, standing at the foot of the bed, looking at him with an expression he described as waiting. Dara noted this in her chart. Patients in the ICU sometimes experience visual phenomena, particularly at night, due to medications, illness, sleep disruption, the particular disorientation of the hospital environment. She was not alarmed. She adjusted his pillow, checked his monitors, told him to call if he needed anything. She went back to the nursing station. At approximately 4 in the morning, another patient's alarm drew her attention, and she spent 20 minutes at the other end of the unit dealing with a routine issue. When she passed Mr. H's bay on her way back, she glanced in automatically, as she always did. There was a figure at the foot of Mr. H's bed. Dara stopped. She blinked. She stepped closer. It was gone. She stood in the doorway of the bay for a moment. The only person in the bay was Mr. H, sleeping. She entered and checked his monitors and his chart and went back to the station. She wrote in her journal that night, during a break, that she had probably been awake too long and was seeing things and that this was normal and she was fine. At 6:15 in the morning, 45 minutes before the end of her shift, Mr. H's cardiac monitor alarmed. He was in ventricular fibrillation. The team responded immediately. The code lasted 11 minutes. They brought him back. Mr. H was moved to a different unit for additional monitoring. He was eventually discharged. Well, 3 weeks later, Dara received a handwritten note in the mail at the hospital. It was from Mr. H. He thanked the staff for saving his life. He said he hoped they would not think him foolish for what he was about to say. He said he wanted them to know that in the moments after his heart had stopped, before the team brought him back, he had seen something. He was clear that he understood this might be the brain doing strange things in extremis. He was not making a claim. He was just sharing. He said he had seen the woman again, the one who had been standing at the foot of his bed. And this time she had not been waiting. She had been shaking her head. Story 7. What followed her home. Every story I have shared with you tonight has had, at its center, a person who encountered something they could not explain. Something that broke, for a moment or for much longer, their understanding of how the world works. The final story tonight is different in one important way. In all the others, the thing that happened had an ending. The person got out. The danger passed. The horror resolved, in whatever incomplete and unsatisfying way these things always resolve. This story has an ending too, but it is not a reassuring one. I am going to call her Elena. She is the only one of the people I have spoken about tonight who asked me specifically to use a name she chose herself, which tells you something about her relationship with this story. Elena is 43 years old now. She was 37 when this began. She was living at the time in a small city in the northeastern United States, in an apartment in a building she had lived in for 4 years. She worked as a high school English teacher. She was divorced, no children, with a close circle of friends and a life she describes as genuinely, quietly happy. Not dramatic, not troubled, just good. The first thing she noticed was the photographs. Elena had a habit of photographing things she found beautiful or interesting, walking to and from work, on her way to the grocery store, around her neighborhood. She did this with her phone in the casual way that people do now, and she rarely went back to look at the images. They accumulated in her phone's camera roll, an unexamined archive of her daily life. On a Sunday in March, she was going through old photos looking for a specific picture from a friend's birthday party the previous fall. In doing so, she scrolled back through months of images. In several of them, there was a man she did not recognize. Not in the foreground, not as the subject of the photo, but visible in the background in the way that strangers sometimes appear in public photographs. A man in a dark jacket, medium height, face usually turned slightly away or partially obscured. In one photo of a coffee shop, he was sitting 2 tables behind the friend Elena was photographing. In a photo of a street mural, he was standing 30 feet away to the left. In a photo taken at a neighborhood street fair, he was visible in the crowd behind Elena's friends, looking in their direction. None of this was, on its own, conclusive. Public spaces have people in them. A stranger appearing in the background of several photos taken in the same small city over several months was not necessarily significant. Except, Elena had a friend, a careful and slightly obsessive friend with an interest in visual puzzles, who had helped her notice the man in the first place, and who now spent an entire Sunday afternoon examining the images. And what the friend noticed was that in 7 photographs taken over a period of 4 months, in locations across the city, from a coffee shop to a street fair to a park to a bookstore, the same man appeared. Not someone who looked similar. The same man. The jacket was different in several images, but the build, the posture, the particular angle of the head were consistent. Elena went to the police. The detective she spoke with was professional and thorough and honest. He told her what she already knew, that the presence of a person in the background of photographs was not a crime, and that identifying someone from partial background quality images was extremely difficult. But he took copies of the photographs and told her to document any further incidents. She tried to forget about it. She was mostly successful for about 3 weeks. Then she found the note. It was under her door. A folded piece of paper, white, no envelope. She found it on a Thursday morning when she was leaving for work. Inside, in small, neat handwriting, was a single sentence. "I am so sorry. I will try to be more careful." That was all. Elena stood in her hallway for a long time, looking at that note. Then she called the police, then she called her school to say she would be late, and then she sat on her couch and thought about what that sentence meant. It was an apology. It was an apology for being seen, which meant that whoever had been in the background of those photographs knew that she had noticed him, which meant he was still watching. The investigation that followed was thorough, genuinely thorough. The detective had taken the situation seriously from the beginning, and it uncovered nothing. No fingerprints on the note. No building security footage of anyone sliding it under her door. No matches for the handwriting in any database. No leads. Elena moved. This was not an impulsive decision. She thought about it for 2 weeks, discussed it with the detective and with her closest friends, and ultimately decided that staying in the apartment felt untenable. She found a new place across the city, told very few people where she was going, changed her commute route to work, and began the careful, exhausting process of making herself harder to find. For 6 weeks, nothing happened. She began to breathe again. She began to tell herself that he had followed her movement once, through her photographs, and that without that window into her daily life he had simply lost track of her. She told herself it was over. Then, 11 weeks after she had moved, she received a text message from an unknown number. The message said, "Your new apartment has a better view. I am glad you are somewhere nice." Elena called the police from outside her building, unwilling to go in. The number was unregistered, purchased from a convenience store in cash, untraceable. She did not go back to that apartment. This is where Elena's story becomes different from the others, because the others had within them some kind of ending, some resolution, however incomplete. Elena's story does not end the way those do. Over the following 2 years, Elena moved 3 more times. Each time, after a period of quiet that she used to recalibrate and begin to hope, there would be another message or another note or another photograph examined and found to contain a familiar presence in the background. Not always, not frequently, just often enough. The police have a file. It is an active file. The detective who first spoke with her has retired, but the case was transferred and it is being worked. There is a lead, she has been told, though she has also been told that lead may or may not be actionable. Elena has changed her life in ways that she does not describe as dramatic, but that I think are. She does not post photographs to social media and has not for 6 years. She does not tell more than 3 or 4 people at a time where she lives, and she changes that circle periodically. She varies her routes. She pays attention constantly to the backgrounds of her environment in the way that most people never have to. She has also, she told me, learned to live within the uncertainty. She says this is the only choice that does not mean surrendering her entire life. She teaches her students. She sees her friends. She laughs. She finds things beautiful. She takes very few photographs now. But when she does, she looks at them carefully before she posts or saves them. She is still looking. She told me one more thing when we finished talking. She said she thinks about the note most of all. Not the messages. Not the photographs. The note. She said the strangest part was the word sorry, because it implied remorse. It implied some kind of awareness that what was happening was wrong. And that, she said, is somehow the most frightening thing. Not the cruelty, not the threat, but the understanding, the KN. Alleged that he knew, and kept going. 7 stories. 7 true accounts from real people who encountered something they could not explain and could not escape quickly enough. I hope you are still somewhere safe. I hope the lights in your room feel adequate right now. I hope the sounds of your home are familiar and unalarming. Because that is what all of this comes down to in the end. The desire for safety. The very human need to believe that the place where we sleep, the streets we walk, the world we move through is fundamentally comprehensible. That it follows rules. That it can be understood. The people in these stories learned, in different ways and at different costs, that the world does not always cooperate with that belief. The man in the attic watched a woman live her life and she never knew. The man with the copied key planned for months and came within a locked bedroom door. The figures on the highway stood in the darkness and waited, and no one ever found them or explained them. The voice behind a door was not who it claimed to be, and we will never know what was intended. The thing in the forest circled a camp in the night and left behind a message that cannot be read. The woman in the ICU appeared at the foot of a bed, 5 nights in a row, for reasons we cannot explain. And Elena is still, right now, tonight, living carefully in a world that contains someone she cannot find. These are not comfortable stories. They were not meant to be. They were meant to remind you of something that our comfortable modern lives make very easy to forget. Remain aware. Trust your instincts. And when something feels wrong, even slightly, even inexplicably, do not tell yourself you are being paranoid. Paranoia is what people call caution after the fact, when nothing happened. When something does happen, they call it the moment you should have listened to yourself. So listen to yourself. Lock your doors tonight. Check the things that should be checked. And if you hear something you cannot explain, do not dismiss it. Investigate carefully. Call someone. Do not go alone into the dark. Take care of yourselves out there. I am your host. This has been The Scary Collector. Stay safe. And stay scared.